See, I told you I'd surprise you with the clip this time, Dan.
Is that a South Park clip?
What? You don't know what that is?
No, what is that?
Is Team America World Police? Which from
same difference. Same difference.
Very close. Which came out 2 years after the first Bourne Identity, which I didn't realize. I had thought that Matt Damon was a joke, and then Bourne Identity kind of helped him be like a real leading man in Hollywood. But I don't know.
I feel like he's kind of always a joke, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's always kind of never taken that seriously to me.
Right. I feel like that has faded, though. That feels like a distinctly 2000s thing to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think his stature has grown tremendously with the help of movies like Bourne Identity.
Exactly.
Welcome, folks. This is Film Trace. This is a podcast where we trace the life of a film from conception to production, all the way to release and reception. We are in episode 3 of our Manhunt series, focusing on movies where someone is being hunted or hunting someone. They were doing the 2000s, Memories of Murder from 2003, and The Bourne Identity from 2002. We have a special guest, John Brooks from the 1999 The Podcast. John, welcome. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your podcast.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's John Brooks, and I host 1999 The Podcast. Well, it's sort of described by the title, I think, pretty well.
Yeah, it is.
You kind of know what you're gonna get.
Why 1999? Why only movies?
Yeah, why 99?
That's a good question. So a few years ago, I'll give a little background into my podcasting history.
Yeah.
Many years ago, before Serial came out, I think, around that time when podcasts were very nascent, right? My friend Joey Lewandowski and I did a podcast where we had no idea what we were doing or how to even do a podcast about, well, nominally about sports, but really it was about using sports as a way to talk about nerdy things and also us to geek out about, right? So it was a pop culture podcast where we kind of started with sports and moved on from there. And it was fun and it was hard work. And then I had, kids and grad school and that sort of thing. And so we stopped doing it after a couple of years. He went on to start a podcast called Cage Club, where he and a friend of ours, Mike Manzi, started watching every Nicolas Cage movie. And
nice.
About them in order, which then spun into a network. And so I, over the years, would appear on some of the shows in that network. And after doing a few episodes of he did one called Cruise Club as well, where he talked about all the Tom Cruise movies. And so I did Magnolia, and I did I think Eyes Wide Shut, and I did an episode on The Matrix for Keanu Club. And I was God, 99 really was every movie that I kind of was obsessed with at a certain point in my life, came out in this year. And then I found Brian Raftery's book, which is about 99. And I was I've been really considering getting back into doing just a movie podcast again. And I was I really want to go through, because I would look at the list of the box office and I'm Jesus, it never ends. The number of movies that are sort of landmark blockbusters or just game changers or cult classics. And it just is endless. I mean, I'm not even really feel I've scratched the surface after two and a bit years now.
Wow. It's nuts.
Yeah. So it's it's a never ending sort of well of movies, and it's a really interesting kind of turning point, both in sort of cinema and also popular culture to talk about. And I'm gonna keep going until I can, and then if I really get bored and I'm in the chill factor sort of realm of the movies that came out in 99 or Wing Commander, maybe I'll move on to 2000 or 2001 or something that.
I say go for it. Keep it going.
Do
you have a favorite from 99?
God. Man, so I was on another podcast last week and he asked me the same question, and it is a little bit like picking a favorite child. It's funny because like it's one of the questions we ask guests on the show. So I feel like I had it coming, right, when people ask me this. I don't think I can. I would choose among like 3 or 4.
What are those 3?
Right. The big ones for me are Magnolia, I think, is the one that I sort of revert to, right? As like, if I really have to pick one, that's it. Yeah. But then also The Talented Mr. Ripley. And Drop Dead Gorgeous, which is Damon. And Drop Dead Gorgeous was a movie that I absolutely love.
You did an episode on that film with director Michael Patrick Jann from The State. That's amazing.
We did. Yeah. So we did an episode on that movie with a few fellow podcaster friends of mine, Chelsea Weber Smith, who hosts American Hysteria, and BJ Colangelo, who hosts This Ends at Prom. And they are diehard Drop Dead Gorgeous fans, and it was a lot of fun. And Michael Patrick Jann actually, like, I posted on Instagram, and Michael Patrick Jann actually like commented on it, and I was like,
That's so cool.
I was like, would you want to spend like 30 minutes talking about it? And he's like, I'd love to. So, and it was right as his movie. Oh God, I can't remember what it's called. The Oregon Trail was coming out, so it was good timing for him. As well. But yeah, he was rad. And as a kid who grew up in the 90s and like The State, I was like, this is so cool.
Yeah. And speaking of stuff when we were kids, you had Sam Levine join you to talk about Blast from the Past.
Sure. Yes, we did. Yeah.
That's super cool. From Freaks and Geeks.
From Freaks and Geeks. Yes, one of the geeks of the Freaks and Geeks.
Yes.
Yeah. It's been cool. So we're we've been on kind of a hiatus for about a month or so. Sure. I am back to flying solo. So Jen had a lot of work conflicts and that sort of thing to deal with. So she had to take a step back, which is a bummer for me. Like, well, okay, you guys co-host a show together, so you know how hard it can be to like, work with a co-host.
Sure, Dan's the worst. I'm just kidding.
There's upsides and there's downsides. But I thought about like if I wanted to find another permanent co-host or not, and I think just for now, I'm just going to sort of like, it's going to be me and a guest or 2 guests, and we'll see how that goes for a little while. And maybe solo, maybe someone will come. I don't know. Maybe someone will come along who wants
someone
to
will find you.
But Jen will be back at some point as a guest on the show. It was really fun having her for like a year or so. So I had Joey for about a year and a bit, and her for about a year, and now it's just going to be me for the time being. But this is my passion project after all. So
absolutely,
yeah, man, absolutely. Yeah. Now, have all of us seen these movies before? I'd never seen Memories of Murder.
I know, it's insane. Yes.
You've seen both of them before?
Yes, right? There's rewatches for both for me. How about you, John?
I'd never even heard of Memories of a Murder before. But I know I'm so uncultured.
Stuck in '99. That's all right.
Yeah.
But I have seen the Bourne Identity many times, and big fan of that movie. So that was not new whatsoever. It's been a while since I'd seen it, but I saw it probably twice in the theaters and a bunch of times on DVD around the time it came out. Big fan. So
did you select this movie, Chris? I can't remember.
I selected Memories of Murder. I think I forget if you or I selected Bourne Identity, but it was a kind of like a duh. You gotta, if you're gonna do Manhunt movies from the 2000s. Yeah. And you had seen Bourne Identity before, right?
Oh, I saw it opening weekend.
Of course, yeah. This is a total damn movie. Classic. No, I saw it when it was out. But I think I saw the first 3 when they were out. I think I attempted to watch Bourne Legacy on DVD and fell asleep. Yeah. But
some diminishing returns.
I hadn't seen Bourne Identity, the first one, since originally in theaters. So this was quite a late rewatch for me. But to begin, with Memories of Murder, since we like to start with the films where we have our protagonist doing the hunting. In this case, classic catch a killer story, but from Korean auteur Bong Joon-Ho, obviously most well known for directing Best Picture winner Parasite, as well as a number of other crossover hits between the East and the West. Snowpiercer, big fan of that film, as well as The Host, and so many more. Okja's great too. I think we mentioned him briefly when we discussed New World on the previous episode, right? Another Korean manhunt movie. And this is kind of, when we think of catch a killer movies that aren't Silence of the Lambs, for me, this movie is at the top of the echelon. And I'm super interested to hear your guys' first thoughts, because this was probably my third watch of the film, and I kind of did the classic thing when I believe I saw The Host about a decade ago or so, where I'm just like, I gotta see all this guy's movies, and so I ran through them all. But this one definitely stands near the top of his work for me, for a number of reasons. But I feel like before I kind of color bias, etc.
You're in a lot of bias already, Chris.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, before I get into the whys, I want you guys.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So, what were your first reactions, and then we'll go ahead and do the tracing of the film.
Yeah, sure. John, you go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, I thought it was great. I mean, so I had seen, like, I hadn't heard of this movie. I had seen The Host and Snowpiercer. I don't think I realized until Parasite that was the same director, right? Like, so it wasn't, it wasn't clear. Korean cinema has like never been my my forte. Sure. But I love his aesthetic. I love his style. As soon as I saw like what this movie was and what it was about, I was really excited to watch it. The performance, the central performance by Song Kang-ho, who's I think in most of his movies, right? Like if not all of them. It's really, really, really compelling. It's a really like hard to take your eyes off kind of a performance. The one thing I struggled with is like, so I don't speak Korean at all. So I can't speak to how good the subtitles were on Tubi. But I get the feeling they weren't great.
It is free after all.
It is. I sometimes, like, one of the things that I kind of miss about, I mean, I'm terrible with like keeping up with physical media and like having a DVD player and Blu-ray player, because I'm just so like, streaming is just so much easier for me now. But one of the things that I miss is like having the option of also watching the dub. Sure. Just because sometimes like the dub is actually better translation, even though it's like weird and awkward. Yeah. There's no perfect way of doing it. I kind of feel like I would have liked to have seen this with a dub. I don't know if either of you ever watched it with a dub, but like, I haven't, no. I kind of felt like it would have benefited from me, because there's so much to like see on the screen and so much to follow, and that having to like do a bunch of reading kind of, I don't know. Yeah. It made it less. I just kind of felt like if I could focus on the screen more, I would have had a better experience. I thought it was great. I mean, I thought it was brilliant, right? Like it's a beautifully made movie. It's so surprising, sort of like what it turns out to be. Love the ACAB energy going on in this movie. It's great.
Dumb cops.
A lot of fun. It was. I'm really glad to have discovered it. It was. It's great.
Awesome. Yeah. Glad you had a good time with it. Dan, reaction, go.
No, it's good. No, it's good. I could not stop thinking about Zodiac when I was watching this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I'm
Fincher
like,
rips it off left and right.
And I'm blown away by how much you ripped it off.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, wait, what the hell? Like, I really liked it. I mean, Parasite, I think, was one of my favorite movies of the last decade. Like, it's unbelievable. And the style here is so prevalent from the opening shots. It's just soaked in atmosphere. And I love the comedy, the black comedy in this. Yeah. It just swings back and forth from this sort of thriller to comedy to political satire. And he's just has such command of what he's doing. And there's like multiple sort of like notes about him and how he shoots. And basically he edits as he shoots. The editor's there like editing as they're shooting scenes. Like, so he is so meticulous about what he wants. And you can absolutely, that comes through pretty much through the entire movie. So I really, really enjoyed it a lot. Now, I have probably the same problem I have with this movie that I had with Zodiac.
Yes.
Which is sort of just like, it kind of doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't really, we can talk about it later on, but it's like the lack of closure to me. I get what he's doing. In real life, this murder was not solved, or these murders were not solved until much later.
Yeah.
But there's the openness of it at the end. I think I had a little bit of problem with, but I don't know. Maybe I'm obviously on this podcast, I'm a traditionalist when it comes to storytelling and protagonists and closure. So that's not that big of a surprise. Right?
Yeah. Cinematic Puritan at heart. I get it. That's, we're the yin and the yang of Film Trace.
That's why we work.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think we should get into that now, because that is kind of the signature hallmark of both of these movies in the 2000s, especially in comparison to when we kind of dig deeper into the past of the manhunt genre pre 21st century. That it was just like this, that wasn't a thing, right? It's like you could not make like a big movie. And while this was not a big movie globally, it definitely was a huge movie in Korea. It was like the #1 film of the year there. For obvious reasons. It's based on a true story. These murders that, like you said, had gone unsolved, that had gripped the nation just a decade prior or so. Why? What do you think is going on there? Like, why is it that, even with a movie that has a lot of like subtext and interpretational kind of leeway, like Silence of the Lambs, even then, like, you have ultimate closure and resolution in that story, or even, a lot of the other classic manhunt movies that maybe are a little more on the artsy, artistic side that we'll get into later, like or that we've already covered on this show, like
Long Legs.
Or yeah. No, we're not going to tread that well again. That's not the idiom. Why did it take so long, or why it did this finally resurface, you think, in the new millennium? This idea that you don't have to actually catch the killer in a catch a killer movie.
That is a loaded question. I don't know. I feel like when he was describing kind of thinking about this movie, and I think there's like some history to this in Korean film overall, I think he talks about, which is essentially that like Korean crime films are often not about like the plot A, B, C, D, E, F, catch the killer. It's more about the human experience of the crime that's actually happening.
Right.
And the people involved, like the victims, the killer, and obviously the police in this case, and what they're emotionally going through in their journey. So I think it was just sort of like timing, and he, came along at the right time to sort of make another one of those movies. I'm sure there's other Korean movies that are like that are like this that we just don't know about. But it did just seem like he was kind of continuing the sort of humanist tradition that you can see in Korean film, where it is a little more focused on human emotional reaction than it is like on plot sort of machinations, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With Zodiac and with this story, right, there's kind of a built-in, well, of course we can't tell you who the killer is, like nobody knows, right? So like you can't tell the Zodiac story and reveal who the Zodiac killer is because still nobody knows. And that's what's intriguing. That's why people continue to be obsessed with the Zodiac story is because we don't know who it was. And indeed, it could have been nobody. And I'm increasingly thinking that it probably was nobody and that there really was never a Zodiac killer, right? But that it's you know, that the Zodiac is actually the product of sort of the psychological toll that it had on the people that it was affecting. And you know, it's funny because our next movie that we're covering on the show when we return, which is going to be around the time probably this episode comes out within a couple of weeks, is Summer of Sam, and and like that's so it's not similar because of course we know who Berkowitz is and we know that like he was the killer, although there's still some conspiracy theorists who are like, sure, no, there's others, whatever. But it's not like an open case in the same way. But what is similar, I think, in terms of what that movie is doing and sort of what its focus is and what this movie's focus is that it's interested not so much in catching the killer as it is in sort of revealing like what this obsession over the killer or what this like fear, what this like the sort of the emotional you know, response that people are having to this unknown and to this like mysterious killer is doing. And like, you know, Summer of Sam really like it's the combination of this like massive heat wave in New York City plus the Son of Sam murders that is like the focus of the story, but not Berkowitz himself. And so like I think there's a similar thread here, right? Because what this movie really is about is not who is the killer. It's like, you know, what is this doing to the minds of these people who are obsessed with tracking this person down? And that's where it keeps its focus. And like, to me, that is always what's most like, I actually halfway through the movie, like didn't really care who the killer was. I'm much more interested in the way that these characters are responding in sometimes maniacal and like absurd ways to this, you know, this crusade to like find this person. And I think that's in and of itself, like really intriguing fodder for a movie like this.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things that hits hard upon rewatch is this concept that the closure we do get is that finally our protagonist, while he hasn't solved the murders, he's decided to like say F you to his former life and leaves the force and goes become like a juicer salesman.
Like a salesman,
yeah. And so like that feels like the important part of the resolution there, at least with regards to our protagonist.
Right.
And I think that like, I don't know, there's this feeling, right, that even though we love, you know, especially in the Western world, to have our stories tie up nicely with no loose ends. You know, one of the main influences for Bong Joon-Ho was the graphic novel From Hell by Alan Moore about Jack the Ripper, which is like the most famous unsolved, like arguably even more well-known globally than the Zodiac Killer. And it just seems like, I don't know, it feels like it's just like Dan and I are the yin and yang of puritanical versus non-puritanical viewpoints on movies. You really can't have one without the other. That's part of the thrill of any Manhunt movie is, you know, are they going to figure it out? A, but then also B, what is this whole aspect of getting obsessed and trying to figure this out going to do to our protagonist? And that's, I think, ultimately what's most important. I also think that it works very well, like you kind of mentioned earlier, both of you did, as like an ensemble comedy piece about just like the futility and the inanity of police work, right? And that those satirical touches are arguably just as effective as the character study going on. What do you guys think? Okay, so like the tone of this, I'm glad that all three of us agree that it does work, because it shouldn't, right? Like on paper, like if you had, you know, an average, you know, filmmaker, amateur be like, I want to do this thing about this thing that scarred our nation, but also it's funny. Like, how does he make that tightrope work here?
It's also, it's the swings are bizarre.
Yeah.
Because you'll go from, you got like a dude masturbating in the woods, you got, you know, this constant comedy there's almost always comedy happening on screen, whether it be like physical or a joke here or there or a look from somebody. But then there's like a fight in the restaurant and he gets a nail through his leg and then it gets amputated and then there's dead bodies and then there's peaches being pulled out of orifices. It's just like this, like all over the place. I mean, that to me is gotta be his sort of signature, like success.
Because he does that in Parasite too.
Exactly. It's that ability to just swing back and forth in tone, and it works for whatever reason. It works incredibly well, I think. What do you think, John? Is that kind of your take on that, or what's your think?
I think the reason that it works so well is because, like, well, as long as you are a good filmmaker and a good writer, then there's no reason that it shouldn't work well, because that's how life is. I mean, like, the reality is that, like, the experience of life is often like dark and hilarious and sad and weird. Like it's all these different things. And like, I feel like a lot of filmmakers, you know, they pick sort of a mood and kind of stick with it the entire way. And like, that's fine. Like that's a choice. It's a way of making movies, right? Like to have like a noir atmosphere the entire time. Yeah. I think Zodiac like basically stays in the same kind of mood, right? The entire time. Yeah. And that's one thing that's different. But again, like it made me think of Summer of Sam again, where it's like, that's a movie where things get like real dark, right? Like, and then real ridiculous. And like,
that's true.
It flips back and forth all the time. And I don't think everybody can pull it off. Right. I don't think necessarily like a lot of people can necessarily do that in a single movie. But the reality is that, like, if you are trying to make something that is human and realistic, you are going to have like moments that are incredibly dark and moments that are incredibly funny, because that literally, like, that's what life is. Right. Like that's the reality of the lived experience. It can be tragic and sad and depressing and deep, or it can be like absurd and ridiculous and over the top. Right. Like, that is just everybody's life kind of is that way. So I actually found it like not at all jarring. I just sort of found it. I was like, this feels very like real, because these people are kind of all over the place and kind of wacky, like most people I've ever met kind of are. Right. And I love that.
Definitely.
Well, it feels so grounded and gritty.
It does.
It feels authentic. It feels like an authentic story.
Even when it's crazy, it feels grounded and gritty. And like that's an impressive thing to pull off. But I don't think it's sort of especially extraordinary, right? That like you would try and do that in a movie.
Sure. Totally. No, I mean, it's not just like comparing directly to Summer of Sam, but like Bong Joon-Ho and Spike Lee, they are both uniquely talented in that aspect that, you know, the movies like Do the Right Thing and The Five Bloods can be like incredibly hilarious one moment and then horribly tragic the next.
Well, like Black Klansman, I think, right? That's another, it's totally. Like the whole sort of pitch of Black Klansman is, well, first of all, it's a true story. Second of all, like, it's completely absurd. And like, third, it's like incredibly powerful, right? Like it's none of that should work, but it all does, because Lee is really, really good at sort of making that balance.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good corollary too, because both movies really have this very clear viewpoint on the police, and you have I think that's another reason the tone balance works for Memories of Murder, is you've got a very clear kind of scathing commentary that's coming through that is part of the reason perhaps why these murders were never solved, or they weren't solved until, you know, years after the film's release. And so you can't I think that's a really salient point. You can't have that kind of ridiculous thing happen in real life without commenting on how ridiculous it is. So I think that brings me to kind of looking at this movie when it came out versus now today, 21 years later, and they have solved the murders, right? Like that's probably one of the strangest legacies of any of Bong Joon-ho's amazing films. The real case remained unsolved for 16 years, but in 2019, as reported by Polygon, Korean authorities confirmed the identity of the killer as Lee Chun-jae, a 57-year-old serving a life sentence already since 94. And Bong Joon-ho obviously probably, and he has commented very limitedly about how that kind of recolors his whole experience making that film, putting that film out, doing publicity for this film, and now seeing a picture of this guy who they have found did these crimes. And that's the thing that also very much sets Memories of Murder apart from Zodiac, right? Like, I think that is another thing that kind of makes it a strange singular experience in terms of movies based on a true story, where the true story continued on after the film came out. It reminded me just of like the first thing that came in my head was like seeing Oliver Stone's JFK as a young kid, and then like they have that, you know, postscript before the credits where they're like, and the confidential papers will be released, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get a calendar and make sure I know that when those papers are released,
right? I remember that.
Right?
Yeah.
What I mean, that that makes things even thornier, right? In terms of like, I don't know. Is there some?
It reminds me of like, what was that movie about? Was it the Peter Jackson movie we did about the real life murders?
Heavenly Creatures.
Heavenly Creatures.
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me a little bit of that on that level, where it's like, here's this movie about real life killers that did this. They're still alive.
One of them is a famous crime writer. Right?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, there's a level of, and I think the thing that like I stated when I watched that movie is like, oh, this feels a little exploitative to me, just a little. And I think with this one too, maybe less so, but like choosing to make a film based on a true story is a choice. And it's a very specific choice. It's a loaded choice. And I always question it to some degree because, like, with this film specifically, you know, he took it from a play that was about the real life murders, and then he kind of rearranged a ton of stuff in it. So it's very loosely based on what happened. Right. And so, like, at that point, it sort of becomes an odd conflation of, you know, true life story, because it's not really. It's really, you know, Bong's imagination through a lot of this, and like filling in the gaps. Like, these police officers probably aren't that real. Like, it's all sort of images and imagination that's now tied to this true story. So I think it's like, for me, it just sort of, I kind of ignore the true story part of it, because to me, it's not really a factor. But that's kind of how I kind of excise it from my head, though.
Well, I mean, it feels a bit like May December, where like, you know, it's Mary Kay Letourneau, but like, it's not. Right. So I mean, it kind of really feels like, from what I understand of the real story versus what's going on in the movie, like, it is kind of a parallel to that. Like, anybody in Korea watching it would like know the story and be like, oh, I know. Yeah. Like, I know what you're talking about here. Or like that movie that came out recently that's like based on the sort of, well, the media version of the Amanda Knox story, not like what actually happened. Was that also with Matt Damon, I think, right? Where he's her dad? Is that right?
Oh, I think you're right. Yeah,
sure it is.
Totally. Yes. Yeah.
How about that? And
Stillwater. That's what Stillwater's about.
Stillwater.
I don't even know.
Yeah, Stillwater.
It's not about that. It's about something that like evokes that story, where like a girl gets, you know, like accused of a crime in like Italy or something, and her dad has to. So, you know, it's a lot of it is inspired by the story of like what happened to Amanda Knox. But I, you know, so the question I had, and I'm not clear about this, is that, is the guy who turned out to do it, because I think this is really intriguing too, right? This kind of recolors the movie a little bit. Is the guy who turned out to do it, is he a corollary to any of the people in the movie? Like, was he ever one of the suspects that is being fictionalized here? I was unclear on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's. I don't. If it is, it's not. It doesn't seem like it's intentional, anyways, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think like Bong Joon-Ho would be like, oh wow, yeah, I included him as one of the several suspects that they must have entertained as possibilities.
Yeah.
But I definitely. I mean, we should probably talk about this because that's like one of the more haunting aspects of the film is the performance by the central suspect that they bring in multiple times and try to hold for questioning, and he's just like got this steely resolve, but he also like all the pieces add together, like the song being played on the radio, and his position and his delicate hands or whatever, and that I don't know if there's any real kind of statement being said there, but it definitely leaves kind of this poor taste in your mouth that reminded me of, or that maybe Fincher borrowed from to create that particularly haunting scene of Zodiac with John Carroll Kirby in the basement, right? When Jake Gyllenhaal knows, thinks that he's, going to see the end of his life. And I think that kind of plays into your original question, Dan, about the exploitation piece, because Bong Joon-ho is a master at trying to be respectful and understanding of how awful this must have been for the community that it affected and the families of the victims, and to show just how terrifying this idea was, that this killer was out there, and that anybody that walked through this particular countryside, especially young women, were scared to death that they'd become prey. And that's one of the things, right, that Bong Joon-ho kind of adds into the narrative is our protagonist's girlfriend walking through. I love that scene where it's kind of that classic Jonathan Demme intercutting thing where you think she's going to be the victim and then it turns out to be somebody else. Where I feel like it's done with such kid gloves that you can't help but see the reverence like just emanating even in the scenes where the police are clearly the butt of the joke. Whereas with something like Heavenly Creatures, or really any based on a true story where the criminal is centered, right? Like that feels way more problematic in a number of ways. I still really like that movie, but it definitely leaves a different kind of sour taste in your mouth where you're like, is their story really the one that we should be talking about, that we should be centering? And Memories of Murder, I think, does a good job of staying away from that. And partly that's just the nature of the story that's being told, because you can't center the criminal if he's never been caught.
Yeah, I think that he definitely takes a viewpoint, like a communal viewpoint of the crimes. Right. And I think that's the thing that's most fascinating about this movie, is because it's not. I don't know that the protagonists are all that strong in this movie, and I just don't think that they are. Right, and it's one of the issues that I have with it to some degree. But I think he's taking the viewpoint of was sort of the communal experience of these crimes at that time. And yes, he uses the lens of the cops and sort of the local people to sort of color it, but it's not about, the main detectives. It's not about that. It's about and you see this so much in how he brings in the political reality of the time. They're living under a sort of essentially military dictatorship, right? And there's a protest movement with students, and there's a conflict between the students and sort of the more fascist police, and we see that play out, and it's constantly brought up kind of in the foreground and background of this movie. So I think that's it. The story of the murders is a vehicle for him to comment about Korean society at this time. Right. That's really what it feels like to me. So I think that's also why it doesn't feel like a normal cop and robbers manhunt movie, because he is definitely diving into that from hell viewpoint, which is a wide angle viewpoint of society and Now, I think the one thing that stands out to me is that I think at the end he tries to ground it in the protagonist. I don't think that he needed to do that. Right. I feel like even more open-ended than what he was thinking ending would have been a little bit better, which kind of feels like From Hell, where it was like,
yeah,
this clearly isn't about Jack the Ripper. This is about like Victorian society and who controls everything and all that sort of stuff, which he was doing here. But yeah, I mean, I think that like he definitely doesn't exploit the murders in the sense that like, hey, this is a salacious sort of thing.
Yeah.
That like I need to like throw it in your face. It never felt like that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, From Hell, I mean, obviously with Jack the Ripper, there's a clear kind of thread of violent misogyny to be pulled, right, in the story of those murders. And so, I mean, here, I think that's also kind of one of the underlying things that he's critiquing in this movie is kind of the cultural misogyny. You know, it's a very like male heavy cast. There's very little in terms of like fully fleshed out female characters in this.
True.
And you know, by sort of not like the victims almost seem like these sort of like, you know, archetypes of like the damsel in distress, right? Where like the way that he sort of like shows their murders and that sort of thing, and sort of the way that they're talked about is in this very sort of like objectified framing, right, where we don't really get a lot of sense of like their stories or anything else. And of course, like that's something that you could criticize modern true crime podcasts and everything else for making a habit of. So I don't think that's a critique that has landed and really you know, made much headway. But it does seem to be like that is part of his point. Like most of our main characters, like they kind of suck. Like they're pretty bad people.
Totally.
They do jump kicks really well, though.
Such good jump kicks.
And I think it's hard to make a movie where you have to have really good actors and really good writing to make a movie where you still want to watch it and the main characters are pretty terrible people, which again speaks to like how well crafted this movie is. But like I don't think it works otherwise, because I do think that's sort of part of the point he's trying to make, right, is you know, it is the sensationalizing, the sort of fetishizing of being the hunter and being the protector of these like innocent girls and that sort of thing, that itself becomes kind of its own problem because it ends up, you know, blinding you to you know, to actually solving the crime, right? And I think that's a really like I've never quite seen it so effectively kind of framed this way, right? I've certainly seen movies where that sort of point, right, like corrupt cops and everything else, like where that point is sort of, you know, well presented, but I don't think ever quite framed in a way that is so so bold and like subtle at the same time, you know?
Yeah. Depressing too.
Yeah, very depressing.
Yeah, ultimately depressing. You know, it's not depressing. Fucking secret agents with amnesia running across Europe.
Here we go.
Oh my god!
I gotta say, guys. I gotta say, I love this movie when it came out, and I've watched it probably 5-6 times in the last 22 years it's been out. I just don't know anymore about it.
It's diminishing. I felt the same way, Dan.
Rapidly diminishing. And I'm watching this thing and I'm like, I don't know anymore about this. Because before I just thought it was like this groundbreaking movie and it kind of did action in a completely different way. And that's all true. That's true. Like it changed kind of the action genre to some degree. But man, I think after watching Doug Liman's Roadhouse, I don't know anymore. John, what about you? What's been your journey with this movie, Bourne Identity?
I still love the series. I'm a fan of Lehman. I mean, Roadhouse notwithstanding, but of course, like, you know, 99 Go is one of my like favorite movies in 99 as well.
Totally.
Quintessential 99.
Absolutely. And like, you know, Edge of Tomorrow. Like he's
Yeah,
I think
so
it's
good. Edge of Tomorrow's so good.
It's really good. Yeah, I think he's a great director. I get what you're saying, that it sort of has faded, but really that's, I think, the result of it being kind of a victim of its own success.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
like for better or worse, like, you know, the James Bond franchise owes more to Bourne Identity than it does to like any previous James Bond movie at this point, right? Like
Totally, yeah.
the whole sort of approach to the way that we think about, like, you know, spy thriller, even the like post Mission Impossible 3 Mission Impossibles, right? The way that we sort of think about the action spy thriller now, like it really was like reset by the Bourne Identity, and
Totally.
it has an enormous shadow that it casts. Has the formula that it creates been improved upon since? Yeah, it probably has, but like I still think this is a really solid movie. Great car chase scene, like. And pretty great performances at its core. So yeah, I mean, I agree. It doesn't hold up the way it used to. It doesn't excite me the way that it used to. Like certainly when it came out, but you know, and maybe I might like one of the sequels better at this point. But yeah,
wait, which one? Supremacy or Ultimatum?
Ultimatum.
Yes. Okay.
Which one's that? Which one's
the third
Ultimatum?
one?
The third one. Yeah. Supremacy is fine. We can talk about it. Like,
but I think that the thing that like stood out for me in watching it again this time is that when I first saw it, it felt really exciting. Like everything about it felt exciting. It just felt so new and interesting and fresh. And then obviously with time that's going to change. But I don't know. Like there's something about the way. Like going through it was like, oh, it was different. It was more grounded. It was more psychological than like plot driven, yada, yada, yada. But I think that like the thing for me is that it felt very flat for some reason. And I don't know why it feels flat now when it didn't feel that way before. It's like the tones or like, I don't know. It just felt, a little lifeless to me and inert.
It did. It felt almost like quaint in retrospect. Like
maybe, yeah,
like an episode of television, like a really good episode of Slow Horses, which I just started watching.
Yeah, good show.
Well, yeah, because it is. I mean, like that's where TV is now, right? I mean,
exactly,
yeah. I mean, but like it wasn't in 2002.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
But it's just
you still had to go to the movie theater to see a movie like this in 2002.
I know. Yeah, the paradigm has shifted so much, but I think you're right on, John. That like, I mean, it's almost difficult to like blame it because. Just because like it's such a event to go see a Mission Impossible movie today, and those are like 45 minutes longer than this and have more epic action.
Let me counter.
Okay,
right? I have a theory here. I think I have a theory. Right, when we think about action movies and really really good action movies, like the ones that stick out in my head, I'm thinking like Die Hard. Terminator's kind of an action movie, but Die Hard's a really good example of like, change the action movie world. Still great, but like I watch that now and it feels amazing. It feels just like it did when I saw it, back in the 80s and the 90s. And why does this one not feel that way? And the thing that stood out to me in sort of like thinking about like tracing the film and what happened, it was a really troubled production. The studio is like, this is not an action movie. What are you doing? It's not an action movie. They tested it. It tested terribly. They had to reshoot like all of these scenes and eventually they're like, okay, I guess we got to release this thing, and they put it out and it ends up being this huge hit, massive hit. But I do kind of wonder if like that fight for making it something really, really different, it made sense at the time. It was a hard fight. It really popped off because of that, because it was different. But for some reason, maybe this again, me being the traditionalist, it's not like a traditional action movie. Maybe is that one of the reasons why it might fade to some degree? Just tossing out there as a theory.
The other like change the game movie that comes to mind is Mad Max Fury Road. And I think
amazing.
that kind of like level of action, world building, set piece, insanity, it was kind of like the point of no return, along with arguably some of the Mission Impossible movies, but especially like the way that we kind of saw action in the, it made a lot of sense that you picked this episode, I think, John, because in some ways this very much feels like a late 90s movie.
Yes,
it really does.
Coming out in 2002. You know, the thing it also reminded me of was, you know, I agree, same thing. 2002, I'm like, oh yeah, this thing rocks. But I also had I have a very distinct memory of like psyching myself out as like a young cinephile in the late 90s, because I was obsessed with like The French Connection, and then Frankenheimer put out Ronin, and then I was just like, yeah, that was a cool car chase movie. But that was it. Like, there's like no meat on the bones necessarily. And I think
I love Ronin.
Wait, what?
Really?
Whoa. You are insulting Ronin on this podcast?
I love Ronin.
Okay, maybe I'm due for a rewatch, but I don't have any fond memory of that movie besides just the car chase.
It's just vibes. It's a vibes movie.
Don't do this, Dan.
No, it's got great twists and turns. Like, you know, it's got great bad guy Sean Bean energy. Like, it's okay, great.
All right, maybe I'll revisit.
I also think something that's kind of unique to Bourne. Certainly, like it borrowed quite a bit from Frankenheimer. It's interesting that you brought up Ronin, because like there's a lot of Frankenheimer influence in what Lehman does with this movie. But I think one of the weird things about Bourne as a franchise is that you know, in the second movie, it got taken over by Paul Greengrass, who went on to direct the second and third movie, and then also the revival, the Jason Bourne movie in 2016. That's like the sequel to the original trilogy, not counting the Hawkeye version. But what's I think sort of, it's almost like this whole series itself like evolved the action genre, because Greengrass kind of took what Lehman had done and then added this like aesthetic of the shaky kind of handheld camera thing, and the more kind of like grainy aesthetic that you didn't typically associate with like an action movie. And Supremacy was like okay, like it as a sequel, like it didn't feel anywhere near as good as the Bourne Identity did. But then it all, like in Ultimatum, it all just sort of came together, and like everything that had come before like really worked in that movie. Greengrass's aesthetic, and also just sort of like the Bourne sort of vibe that had been created out of the last couple movies. So I think part of it is that like, yes, this is kind of a landmark action movie, but it's one that like put into place a kind of a progression, whereas like Die Hard is perfect in the like pre-existing sense of what an action movie was supposed to be. And like the same thing for like Aliens, right? It's like it's like a perfect action movie in like the traditional understanding of what an action movie is supposed to be. I think the Bourne franchise pushed us into new territory, and like, again, whether or not it holds up or whether or not it's still great, I think is a different question from the fact that like it is incredibly important to get us to the sort of like action television series that we have today. Like there's no 24 without Bourne.
That's
really
true.
Like,
yeah, well,
24,
that's not about two.
We could have done without 24.
24 started before Bourne, but like as 24 went on, it clearly took on like Bourne Identity sort of aesthetics, and you know, it became a very different kind of a show in the second and third season, and that sort of reset the rules of what an action spy TV series can be as well. So, you know, I just think it's a really like important movie in kind of the history of the action kind of spy genre.
But I do wonder, like, where did action go? I'm just throwing this out there. I have no thoughts on this, actually. I'm just asking you guys. Like, where did it all go? Because you're right, it did all change. And then what happened? Like, what's been the last great action movie, like think about the last 5 years, decade.
The last
Mad
Mission
Max
Impossible
Fury.
movie. It's like easily.
Okay,
Probably,
yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Besides that, though, I don't know.
Mad Max Fury Road is a
in
really
John
good
Wick
example.
series.
John Wick. Yep.
Yeah, God, I just don't
Monkey
know that I
Man
like action
is
movies
pretty
anymore. I think this is my problem. This is a me problem. I just
It's a Dan problem.
I think I harken back to the 80s. I don't know. I like when you say Aliens and you say Die Hard, and I'm like, well, this is not even in the same universe as those. Just from like my viewpoint of filmmaking, like I sit down and watch one of those movies, and it is such I sat and watched this down like right before we came on this podcast. I watched this movie again, and I'm just like, yeah, okay, cool. Like it does have like it has a lack of just stature to everything that's in it. I don't know why that is. It just doesn't pop at all the way that it used to. Well, it feels so beyond dated.
Would you consider the Fast franchise like an action franchise?
Definitely.
That's pretty big, right? But I think like one of the answers to your question, and I think this sort of coincides with the much written about death of the movie star,
sure,
where like Tom Cruise is our last movie star, right? Like and some of the best action movies like Top Gun Maverick and The Last Mission Impossible, right? He still makes. And I feel like action movies were so tied to specific stars.
Yeah.
Right? Like Van Damme in the early 90s with like, Hard Target and like Sudden Death, which are both like great action movies.
Sudden Death.
I love Sudden Death. It's so good.
The original
but then like I think the last time we really tried to have an action star franchise is around like Dwayne Johnson, and like,
yeah,
it doesn't. It's just
you're hating something because like, Top Gun Maverick was one of my favorite. Like I've watched that movie like 20 times. I was like, this is amazing. Like this is exactly what I wanted.
It's way too fucking stressful for me to watch it 20 times.
Oh, it's so good. But you're right. There's something about maybe the star power here, or like the identity of like this center, because he's so. I mean, another thing part of this movie is he doesn't have an identity.
Right.
He doesn't have necessarily a personality. He's been like, basically created in a lab.
I mean, it also makes me think of this whole issue with action movies that I think I personally have, which is the whole like video game syndrome, where it is like you don't have a protagonist, you have an avatar, and to some degree, that's going to be true of any kind of event movie that where the action eclipses the character, and so that's where that movie star power tends to come into play. I don't know if Matt Damon really has it in 2002. He wasn't the original choice, right? Damon wanted Brad Pitt. He even entertained Sylvester Stallone,
who we got for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but like not for right. Yeah.
And Bullet Train. Ugh. But
yikes.
Well, did he direct that? I think he produced it, right? Or did he?
Yeah. But I don't have a lot of skin in the game, because it does feel like one of those things where it's very much of the moment, and for some people it's going to have staying power and others it's not, but we would be remiss not to mention, at the very least, kind of one of the main reasons I think this movie's reputation precedes itself is shaky cam, right?
Yes,
for better or worse. And Greengrass continued this in the sequels, perhaps even to a more absurd degree,
much more.
As did several other directors in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Does that kind of affect the diminishing quality for you, Dan, anyways? Because it did for me, but not as much as I thought it was going to.
Oh, it did. That and the music.
Okay. Oh, the music. Yeah.
It's just It's I don't know. It there's something about the whole experience where it just I think he was trying to do something different, and he was trying to do something outside the norm, and it was outside the norm, and it was kind of hip and in at the time.
Yeah.
I think it might be me just getting older, to be honest with you. Like, I think it's just like one of those, it's going through phases in my head, and it's just in a bad phase right now.
We had, father figures that would say that this is no Clint Eastwood, Western, and we're going to say this is no Bruce Willis in a building full of Alan Rickman. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a guy with some psychological problems who wasn't,
Well,
wasn't that cool.
I generally love John Powell, but yeah, I mean, a lot of movies from this time are sort of experimenting with different ways of scoring and soundtracks. I mean, a lot of that you can thank The Matrix for, quite frankly, right? So certainly The Matrix. And Fight Club, yeah, The Matrix and Fight Club both sort of reimagined like what the audioscape of a movie, especially like a sort of marquee action movie, could look like. But Chris, I also you said something interesting there that I also think is at play when we're talking about sort of what happened to the action movie, and I think one of the answers is that we now have video games with production values and sort of explosions and intensity that rival, if not surpass, anything that is in a Hollywood action movie. And like you can play it, like you don't have to just watch Bruce Willis do it all for you, right? And so I do think there's something to be said that in part, like the modern sort of cinematic video game sort of landscape is really like that has replaced a lot of the action movies, and they also play directly to the kind of audience that action movies used to target, right? Yeah. So I think there's an essay to be written there, right? Like I'm just kind of floating that out, but I'm fairly sure that is also like one of the things that has changed the both the scope and also like the number of action movies that are released in a given year at this point.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more that you could go down this rabbit hole, not just about the action genre, but also how it relates, to the perhaps political underpinnings of adapting a 20-year-old pulp thriller. We didn't even mention how awesome it is to see Chris Cooper get so mad at a telephone.
Oh hell yeah! Anytime Chris Cooper's in a movie, like I can't like American Beauty I hate, but like Chris Cooper's in it,
but he's so good in it.
Yeah, he's amazing in everything he does. And Brian Cox, like, come on, it's
yeah, it's great.
It's an awesome cast.
But nevertheless, we have run out of time and have some trivia to play. Are you guys ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so John, here's how trivia works for this Manhunt season of Film Trace. We are tracing the life of the film, but we are also tracing a man that we're hunting from place to place, to location. So we've got a list of locations where a movie takes place and moves from scene to scene. First person to name it gets the point. Best out of 5 wins. Are you ready?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Number 1. And these are all other Manhunt movies from the 2000s, by the way.
Okay. All right.
It starts in Ethiopia. Then we go to the Wind River Range of the Rocky Mountains, to a Philadelphia apartment, and then along the Delaware River and the Kentucky Highway to the Tennessee forests.
Ethiopia?
It starts in Ethiopia. And we come back to Ethiopia after going to a character named Serbiak's estate. But then the final climax of the film takes place at Colonel Isaac Johnson's house in Montana.
Shooter?
Yeah, good work, Dan.
Oh, nice. So I've never seen Shooter, so I wouldn't have
gosh, you gotta get up on your Mark Wahlberg filmography. Yeah,
I've watched a lot of Mark Wahlberg movies, and I generally like Mark Wahlberg as an actor, but I have not seen Shooter.
It's crap.
It's terrible.
Okay,
it's terrible. Good. It's basically unwatchable trash.
Okay, but number 2. Also arguably trash, but from a otherwise very lauded director. There's an extra clue for you.
Okay.
Number 2 starts in Kosovo. Yeah, I'm talking about the Kosovo conflict. And then we go to Silver Falls State Park, Oregon, where
Oregon.
Yeah, Oregon. Sorry,
killing
you live there, not me.
Midwesterners.
Oregon. and then the Columbia River Gorge, Mount
Yeah.
Hood National Forest, to a cabin in British Columbia, then to Ross Island, Portland, and then the FBI offices in Salem, Oregon, and then a federal courthouse, Portland International Airport, the abandoned Blue Heron Paper Company, and then finally the denouement at Tom McCall Waterfront Park.
Yikes. I don't
Oh,
know.
boy.
Johnny got anything?
Nothing's coming to mind.
I want to say Hannibal. Is that a movie?
That is a
It
movie.
is a movie. It is indeed a movie. Not this one.
That's not it.
2000s Manhunt. Kosovo to Oregon, basically.
Yep.
What
The director.
Manhunt movies in Oregon?
The director was William Friedkin.
What?
Yep.
Did he do Bug or whatever?
William
Yeah,
Friedkin.
he did Bug. No, that's not this one. It is it literally. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a.
Hold on, no, hold
hopefully
on. Give me one more clue.
Absolutely. Here you go. The one of the leads. Actually, both leads have won Best Supporting Actor, and one of those leads was in one of the most famous Manhunt movies of all time from 1993.
Okay, I don't remember the name of it, but it's Tommy Lee Jones, right?
Yep.
And
I think Dan, you picked this originally, and I was like, I don't
Benicio
want to do
del
that.
Toro.
Yes.
I don't know the title, but I can see the movie
Benicio del
in my
Toro
head.
and Tommy Lee Jones.
I saw it. I thought it was okay. I don't know. It was a long time
Yeah,
ago.
it's aggressively mediocre. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. What's it called?
The Hunted.
Switchback?
The
Hunted.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
I
It was
don't
a,
think I've ever seen that movie. I think I just picked it.
It's the most generic title.
it's really
that's why
unfortunate.
I forgot. Because,
Yeah, it's Hunted movies.
I
Okay,
know.
The Hunted.
I'm giving myself half a point for that one. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So 1 to half right now. Number 3. We start at Indiana State Prison and then go to Michigan City, Indiana, then over to the Statesville, North Carolina Sallyport, Joliet, Illinois farmhouse, the thick woods near East Liverpool, Ohio,
Okay.
to a U.S. Congress corridor. And yeah, you better believe J. Edgar Hoover's in that corridor. Then over to downtown Chicago.
Public Enemies?
Yes, Dan, nice work.
Wait, what is it?
Public
Public
Enemies,
Enemies.
Michael Mann,
Oh,
the
right.
John Dillinger
Oh,
picture.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got that, Dan, but I am sad I did not get to say Carol Schleman's Whorehouse, but I just got to say it now. So there you go.
Okay. Terrible movie.
Absolutely. Michael Mann's worst, maybe?
Yeah. No, have you seen Ferrari yet?
No, still haven't.
Big yikes. Big yikes.
Number
Wait,
4.
which one? Which one's bad?
Oh, both of them. Ferrari. You've seen Ferrari. It's so bad.
We got some hot takes. I'm sorry. Number 4, Highland Park, Michigan convenience store. We begin. The Mercer household is where a lot of the film takes place,
Mercer.
both interior and exterior of the home.
Home Alone.
Highland.
Nice.
Highland. I mean, those are Manhunt movies, right? Kind of.
Technically, yeah.
Yeah.
Highland Park High School gym. First
Highland
National
Park.
Building, downtown Detroit. Inner City Detroit apartment building. City of Highland Park Police Department. And then we end on an icy, frozen Lake St. Clair.
Chain Reaction. No, it takes place in Wisconsin.
No. Yeah.
Training Day.
man.
No, it's Los Angeles.
I might be the only one of the 3 here that has seen this film. Director,
Brothers?
though. Oh, what? No, you're close. What?
What'd you say?
Brothers? Four
No.
Brothers?
4 Brothers. There
Oh,
you go.
Four Brothers. I have
Yes.
seen that. Oh,
Okay.
damn. Okay.
I haven't seen it. I just remember it.
Yeah, no, John Singleton. It's not
Yes.
bad. It's kind of a fun pulpy mess.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, number 5. I'm just gonna. You're the guest, John. So if you get number
Yeah.
5, you win, no matter what.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's how it
okay.
works.
Okay. We begin in the Woodland Avenue cottage, and then move to Kansas City Street, and then the Topeka Exchange Saloon, to a Baggage Express train car, to a house over on Troost Avenue, the Harrison Homestead, Ed Miller's cabin down the road, a barn and slope above a ravine at Harrison Farm. Then finally we get to the Kansas City Commercial District. Captain Henry Craig's office at the Times building in Kansas City.
Kansas City.
Elias's grocery store in Richmond, Virginia, right down the way. American Telegraph office, Lafayette Street in St. Joseph, Missouri, to the Broadway Theater. Baltimore Street.
Jesus Christ. Why is this
all
movie
over the
going so many
place.
places?
It's so many places. And it's such a long movie. It's nearly 3 hours.
Oh, what's that one? American... No.
3 hours.
We even wind up in Central Park, New York, in a courtroom.
Okay. Is there more?
I mean, there's more. There's Bob and Dorothy's apartment, Edward O'Kelly's cabin, Rio Grande Avenue, the Omaha Club. We end at the Omaha Club after a short stop at the machinist's shop about one of the most famous manhunts from the old Western days.
Okay. Oh, wait. Is
True
this...
Grit?
Not True Grit.
Is it... oh, God.
310 to Yuma?
Nope. It's got
the
much
Jesse
longer
James
title
one?
than that. Yes.
Hold on.
You got
The
it.
assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
Boom. You got it. Nice.
I've never seen that. People love that movie.
It's great.
People love it.
It's fantastic. And you've seen Blonde, but not his earlier work, where he actually did something worthwhile.
That's a great movie. I keep forgetting that movie is like it doesn't feel like 3 hours. I will say, like it's gorgeous.
Is that with who's in that? Is Casey Affleck in that?
Casey Affleck
and Brad Pitt.
One of the best Brad Pitt performances.
Ben Forrester. Did I make that up?
And Sam Shepard, I think,
Foster.
Right? Is it Sam Shepard?
Sam Shepard. Oh, he's really good in that.
Yeah, he's great.
Oh man, John, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a blast talking about two very different movies that are essentially still part of the Manhunt universe. What do you have anything planned for like your first solo show of 1995?
Yeah, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, so the first solo one is going to be, as I said, Summer of Sam. For a long time, like we were doing like themed rounds, and I'm just gonna start just doing the movies that I want to do. So we're just gonna we're gonna fly all over the place from like genre to genre. But Julia Sermons, who has been a guest on the show a number of times, is great. She's going to be joining me for Summer of Sam. So that'll be around like, within probably a week or so of when you hear this.
Nice.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
But yeah, I mean, like I tell people the stuff we haven't done and they're like, Jesus. So like after like 2 and a bit years, like we haven't done Austin Powers. We haven't done October Sky. We haven't done Galaxy Quest. Like there's just, we haven't done the Iron Giant. Like there's just so many, like it's ridiculous. What is, we haven't done
99.
Ghost Dog yet. And that's
Ghost
it.
Dog.
Yeah. So
awesome.
there's an infinite well of stuff that we just
absolutely.
And
Dan, what do we got? Yeah, you got one more plug for Wing Commander. Anybody out there want to talk about Wing Commander?
I almost walked out of Wing Commander. It's one of the only movies I walked out of. Yeah.
As like a 13-year-old.
Yeah, I was like, get me out of here.
Oh
this
my
is
God.
absurd.
Amazing. Dan, what do we have next going into the 1990s? Speaking of that great decade.
Cure from 1997.
Yeah.
And then we got One False Move, which I'd never seen before, from 92 in the 90s. And then we got the 80s coming up afterwards with Manhunter and The Running Man. So we got a couple of fun episodes talking about some Manhunt movies coming up for the 90s and 80s. As always, we appreciate you. Thanks for listening. This has been Film Trace.